There are two official inflation numbers in America right now. One says prices are still running dangerously hot. The other says it's nearly back to normal. Same country, same month, the same raw data. The two numbers sit 1.5 points apart. And surprise, surprise, the Fed's brand new chairman prefers the lower one. You might be thinking, it's barely 1.5 points, why should I even care? Because that tiny gap controls your mortgage, your savings, and the borrowing cost of the entire country. Today, the US government spends over $1 trillion a year just paying the interest on its debt. That is more than it spends on its entire military. To survive a debt this size, Washington badly needs cheaper money. But it can't lower interest rates while the inflation number is still running hot. So what's the plan? If you can't fix the inflation, you change who gets to decide how hot it is. By the end, you'll see how a boring rent number is holding the economy hostage, who really owns America's debt, and why your savings are the ones quietly paying the bill. Let's get straight into it. Picture an ordinary household living beyond its means for years. Every year it spends more than it earns and covers the gap with the credit card. For a long time that worked, because the card charged almost no interest. That household is the United States government. The balance on its card has now sailed past $30 trillion. That's more than $90,000 of debt on the shoulders of every American alive, newborns included. None of it hurt much while borrowing stayed cheap. Then inflation showed up. The central bank pushed rates up hard to fight it, and the minimum payment exploded. Just carrying that old debt now costs over $1 trillion a year, money that doesn't build a single road or hospital. And it tightens further because a lot of that debt was borrowed short and cheap during the pandemic, and it's all maturing now. Close to a third of everything the country owes has to be rolled over this year, swapped for fresh loans at today's far higher rates. Every time that happens, the bill ratchets up again. So how does a government escape a $30 trillion debt trap? It has three options: spend less, tax you more, or make the debt cheaper to carry. The first two are political suicide. Nobody wins an election by raising taxes or cutting pensions. Which leaves door number three: cut interest rates. If the central bank cuts, this impossible mountain of debt quietly becomes manageable again. But there's a massive roadblock parked in front of that door. Before it can cut, the central bank needs inflation fully under control. And right now, the official inflation thermometer says the economy is still burning hot. The mainstream media keeps missing the real problem here. That thermometer is broken. Once you see how the government is miscalculating your cost of living, you won't be able to unsee it. To measure inflation, you have to look at what people spend the most money on. For almost every household, that's the roof over their head. That's why housing makes up roughly a third of America's entire inflation index. Move that one piece, and you move the whole system. For renters, this is easy. The price is right there on the lease. But here's the problem. Most Americans don't rent, they own. And you can't slap a monthly price tag on a house someone already lives in. So, what do the government statisticians do? They use a workaround. They guess what it would cost to rent your home, and they file that guess as your official housing cost. To make the guess, they look at average rents across the country. But that average has a long delay baked into it. Remember, landlords don't hike the rent on a sitting tenant every month. Leases usually reset once a year. So the inflation figure you see on the news is forever looking in the rearview mirror. It's reporting rents that were signed many months ago. Now follow what that does. New rents shot up in 2022, then cooled off fast as the market calmed. But the average everyone reports is still climbing toward where rents already went. The thermometer is showing a fever that in the real world mostly broke a long time ago. This is not a rounding error. Measure housing using the rents people actually sign today, and inflation would have hit the central bank's target as far back as 2023. Rates could have come down sooner and faster. An accounting convention about rent is quietly setting the cost of a $30 trillion debt, which raises an uncomfortable question. If the thermometer is this easy to misread, everything depends on who's holding it. Enter the brand new head of the central bank. he has made one thing clear. He prefers the lower number. Think about how convenient that is. The government is drowning in debt, and lower inflation lets it cut rates and make that debt cheaper. And the new man in charge just happens to favor the exact measure that gives the government what it wants. Even the bank's own economists are waving red flags, warning that this lower number is hiding real inflation. But the man with the power likes the convenient answer. So who is actually lending America all this money? A few months ago, the central bank's own researchers found out. For decades, the story went like this. America borrows, and the big patient lenders are foreign governments. China, Japan, steady money, parked for the long haul. That story is out of date. China has been quietly selling for years, cutting its pile of U.S. debt by more than a third from its peak. Foreign central banks, as a group, are holding their smallest share in about a decade. The patient money is walking out the door. So who took its seat? This part sounds invented, and it isn't, because it comes straight out of the central bank's own research. The single largest foreign holder of American government debt today is not a country. It's a cluster of hedge funds registered for tax purposes on the Cayman Islands. A speck in the Caribbean is now a bigger creditor to the United States than China, than Japan, than Britain. How does a tiny island outlend a superpower? With borrowed money, and a staggering amount of it. These funds squeeze a sliver of profit out of tiny price gaps in the bond market. The profit per trade is so thin that, to make it worthwhile, they borrow enormous sums, commonly 50 times their own money, sometimes 100. Put plainly, the world's safest asset is now owned by some of the world's riskiest traders. We've seen this bomb go off before. In March 2020, when the world panicked, these exact funds were forced to dump hundreds of billions in U.S. debt almost overnight. The market for the safest asset on Earth started to crack. The central bank had to rush in and buy it all, just to stop a total collapse. Now imagine the markets panic again. These funds get forced to sell. The cost of America's debt spikes, and the central bank is left with one option: buy it all. Which is just a polite way of saying, print more money. And you don't have to wait for a hypothetical panic. There's a war burning on the far side of the world right now, and it's shoving that broken thermometer straight up at the worst possible moment. Earlier this year, a shooting war broke out between the United States, Israel, and Iran. In the thick of it, Iran did the thing the world had always dreaded and declared the Strait of Hormuz closed. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil normally passes through that one narrow channel. The result was a global scramble for fuel. A gallon of gas climbed more than $1 across the country, and parts of California sailed past $6. The link back to the trap is direct, because that oil spike is one of the biggest reasons the thermometer reads hot in the first place. Energy seeps into the price of nearly everything. So when a ceasefire took hold and oil began sliding back down, the official inflation number started falling on its own, without the central bank lifting a finger. That's the gift the new chairman has been waiting for. If oil keeps cooling, headline inflation drifts lower, and suddenly there's a respectable reason to cut rates that has nothing to do with the national debt. The fever breaks, the path to cheaper money swings open, and everyone gets to pretend it was about the economy all along. The White House is already telling that story. Asked about the ugly inflation print, the president's answer was, and I'm quoting him exactly, "I love the inflation." His own explanation, in the same breath, was that he loves it because the moment the war ends and the oil flows again, prices come down. Read it that way and it stops being a gaffe. It's a trailer for the main feature. Inflation is temporary. Easing is coming. Just keep in mind who benefits the day that becomes the official line. So where does the trap lead? There are a few exits, and they share an unsettling family resemblance. It could muddle through, growing just fast enough to outrun the debt. It could hit a crisis, where lenders panic and borrowing costs spike anyway. Or it takes the quiet road. Let inflation run a little hot and slowly shrink the debt by shrinking the value of every dollar behind it. Notice what almost every road has in common. your dollar ends up buying less. And this isn't just my opinion. Last month, JP Morgan Asset Management published a report called 5 Scenarios for the Federal Debt, written by their chief global strategist, David Kelly. He walked through the same ways out of this trap and crossed almost all of them off the list. Raise taxes? The report says broad tax increases are so unlikely they can safely be ignored. Cut government spending? Federal civilian employment just hit its lowest share of the workforce since at least 1939, so there's very little room left. And Social Security is off the table. Force the central bank to cut rates? It seems obvious with over $1 trillion going out the door on interest. But JP Morgan says this is the option to rule out first. Because the moment the bond market thinks the Fed is bailing out the government instead of fighting inflation, long-term rates shoot up. The cure makes the disease worse, which leaves the last and most likely scenario. The debt just keeps drifting higher and nobody fixes anything. And here's JP Morgan's actual takeaway. They're quietly telling their wealthy clients to add international assets because, in their own words, this rising debt could eventually drag the dollar down. But I'm not here to hand you a doomsday prophecy with a date stamped on it, because right now, the central bank is doing the opposite of everything I've described. It just held rates flat. Its own officials are hinting at a hike rather than a cut, and traders are betting they'll tighten before they ever ease. The deep structural pressure points one way, the present moment leans the other. Anyone who swears they know the month it snaps is guessing. So stop trying to guess the exact date the system cracks. Just watch the data. When the government is about to flood the economy with cheap money, 5 things tend to move together. The dollar weakens, the stock market runs, long-term borrowing costs fall, gold climbs, and Bitcoin rallies. The moment the new chairman refused to budge on rates, every one of those 5 signals moved the opposite way. The market is telling you the easy money era is not here yet. Quick disclaimer, I'm an educator, not a financial advisor, so talk to a professional before you invest. But the takeaway is practical. A massive national debt isn't a reason to panic and stuff your cash under the mattress. It's a wake-up call. It's proof that keeping all of your wealth tied to one single economy in one single currency is a risky bet. The people who get wiped out never saw the game being played. The ones who come through fine read the trend early and quietly got ready before the storm. So we finish where we started, with a single decimal point. It sounds absurd that the value of your money, the cost of a government's debt, and the independence of the most powerful bank on earth could all hinge on how a statistician guesses the rent on a house nobody is renting. But that's the world as it's actually built. The biggest forces tend to hide inside the dullest details, which is exactly why almost nobody thinks to look there. The number is going to move. The only question is whether you understand why before it shows up in your grocery bill or after. And if you're watching from outside the United States, I'd honestly like to know, is your own central bank measuring inflation any more honestly than this one? Tell me in the comments. Stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.